In making a tabletop RPG setting come to life, how people talk isn't, talked about all that much. So let's talk about it. Recently, I rewatched the Firefly series because, why not? One of the most delightful things about Firefly and Serenity is the economy with which they transport viewers to a distinctive imagined future. The backstory is minimal, there are no elaborate factional conflicts, the ships and sets aren't terribly unique, and most of the planets look like Bronson Canyon. So how is it that the setting feels so alive? I think dialogue is the secret ingredient here. First, occasionally a character will say something in Chinese. We don't even need to know what it means, and it's probably better that we don't, to recognize that this is a different future. A little goes a long way. Second, every once in a while you hear something in the dialogue that makes sense but requires a half second to parse. It's all of a kind, specific words put together in a way that evoke the spirit of the Wild West, that lawlessness, that frontier feeling. Whether people actually spoke that way in Nevada City in 1881 is beside the point. The Wild West is ingrained in our collective memory. Its echoes are everywhere in global pop culture. So when we hear Mal declare, "I aim to misbehave," or Shepherd Book reckons something, that's all our brains need to conjure up all sorts of associations with the Wild West. This evocation of the Wild West serves another purpose as well. It separates the denizens of the scruffy outer planets from the citizens of the sanitized alliance. So in the Firefly universe, how people speak is as important as the words they're saying. This recognition got me thinking about other works I admire that similarly leverage dialogue, and I was thinking particularly in the context of making a tabletop RPG setting come alive. The first one I want to look at here is the book Riddley Walker. This is a book that takes effort to read. It doesn't require name of the rose, historical references, and 3 languages level effort, just basic parsing of the text. But working your way through the words is like encountering a thick regional accent. After a time, you pick up on its rhythms and you come to understand what's being said. First published in 1980, Riddley Walker is written from the perspective of its titular protagonist, a boy living in what might be called a scrap iron age in inland England, 2 millennia after a devastating nuclear war. Everything about the setting and its inhabitants is different from what we as readers know. So the author, Russell Hoban, didn't just adjust a few words here and there. He changed the spelling of familiar words and applied a particular cadence to the narrator's delivery. Forgive this attempt. Still, it takes you strange walking in your old footsteps like that, putting your grown-up foot where your child foot run, nor didn't know nothing what were coming. Here's another one I really like. I tried to plot the probabilities of that and program what to do next. That reconstruction of language, combined with the details of a society alien to our own, make reading Riddley Walker a uniquely immersive experience. But because the book relies so much on the spelling of words and a full lexicon of terms that are highly bound to history and terrain, there isn't much of direct practical value we as role players can apply from its use of language. I still hardly recommend Riddley Walker for its own sake and as an example of how powerfully dialogue can shape a fictional world. The Crossed Plus 100 comics are post-apocalypse tales of a far different stripe. They portray fledgling civilization rebuilding in Tennessee a century after an infected outbreak almost wiped out humanity. These infected are a manifestation of humanity's worst impulses. They engage in depraved, wanton violence and make the walkers of The Walking Dead seem relatively benign by comparison. As you might expect, enduring that kind of collective trauma marks survivor culture. How can foul language be considered offensive in a world that has gone completely off the rails? Famed writer Alan Moore exposes this through dialogue. For example, fuck is already a famously multi-purpose term, but 100 years after a zombie apocalypse, it's lost any shock value and is used simply for emphasis. Unlike the Firefly Serenity use, the language of Crossed Plus 100 evokes a specific history in the very story that's being told. This story connects the past and the present, that which came before the surprise and that which came after the surprise. So the words they use need to keep reminding us of those connections. In Firefly and Serenity, the use of archaic language is just there for thematic purposes rather than to explicitly support the story. There's a lot about the power of dialogue to be learned from Crossed Plus 100, but it's also a lot more involved than what you find in the Firefly universe. While a cheat sheet would do to keep track of linguistic differences in the setting, more effort would be required to make sense of it all. Critically, more effort would be required at the game table. Even the most ardent method actor would have to put a lot into it. So, as with Riddley Walker, I enjoy the Cross Plus 100 comics, both as artistic works on their own merits and as inspiring world-building examples, but I wouldn't attempt to embrace that level of linguistic drift in a role-playing campaign. Deadwood, written by primarily David Milch, uses dialogue informed by the rough-and-tumble Dakotas of the 1870s. If you're offended by dirty language, you'll bounce right off Deadwood. But what fascinates me most about the show's dialogue is how it combines vulgarity with wit. The denizens of Deadwood are not society's winners. These are not well-heeled, highbrow East Coast landowners. They're almost all taking a shot at success in this lawless frontier town because they feel they have no other options. They speak the language of people accustomed to bad breaks, tough choices, and bitter disappointment. And they do it with a sort of eloquence that's just almost impossible for us to emulate. Deadwood is a dangerous place, a pit of conflict, but none of its inhabitants are two-dimensional, and a vein of dark humor flows throughout Deadwood. Consider this exchange between Swearingen, the town's unelected boss, and Dan Doherty, his chief henchman.
We forgo the rock for the dagger, learn distractions, use, and deceptions before the dagger is employed. Spirits, women, games of chance.
I'm older and I'm much less friendly to fucking change.
Change ain't looking for friends. Change calls the tune we dance to.
Again, we find ourselves looking at and listening to a work of art that stands out for many reasons, among them its ability to build a world with words. And again, it's a bit much to emulate in a role-playing campaign, either for GMs or players. Now, this is the moment in this little tour when I fess up. I have left dialogue untended for quite a long time in my gaming. It's not that I haven't used it. It's just that I haven't used it. I haven't engaged with it as much as I really would like since probably the early 1990s. At that time, my original gaming policy and I were converting our long-running in-person Shadowrun campaign to a form of play-by-post, in which I, as the GM, would write the player characters into difficult situations. The players would write their characters most of the way out, and I'd wrap it all up in a conclusion. As part of that process of converting to this play-by-post approach, I collected slang from the multitude of Shadowrun supplements I owned, and I made a slang sheets to help us write better dialogue. It was a multi-page affair that took several hours to complete, but it proved quite useful as a writing aid. Now, eventually that play-by-post campaign ended, real life got in the way, and for a few years my only interaction with tabletop RPGs was reading rulebooks and pining for the good old days. When I got back into gaming, it was at first infrequent. The full-on immersion of the Shadowrun days was a thing of the past. Later I found a new gaming group, discovered lots of new games, started learning new tricks, and I built deep campaigns. But I really never put as much thought into the day-to-day speech patterns of the characters I ran, either as an NPC or occasionally as a player. But now that it's on my mind, I really feel like I need to bring it in with more force. So my biggest takeaway from this little journey of looking at dialogue in other works or other kinds of works is that it can be a powerful tool in establishing, setting, and evoking themes. Inspiration is all around us. Valley Girl, Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, Clueless, Idiocracy. There's many more examples that provide similar lessons. As a practical matter, though, that Shadowrun cheat sheet I created would place an undue burden on actual in-the-moment role-playing. A handful of terms, a few undefined references here and there, think about the Roy Batty soliloquy at the end of Blade Runner, really are enough to transport us from the table or from our screens to an alternate world without turning game night into a language immersion class. It seems that the Firefly Serenity approach in most cases should be just about right. It's not that it's about pulling you into the Wild West. It's about using a few words here and there to pull you out of your normal day-to-day and into the campaign world. So now, if you'll excuse me, I have a brief slang sheet to write for my DeGenesis campaign. Thank you as always for watching, and I appreciate any comments you have here or in the Discord.